Midnight bark. The insistent pounding vibrated through Marcus's chest before it registered in his ears. He was deep in REM, a battlefield dream fading at the edges. He surfaced slowly, the rhythmic thudding pulling him further into wakefulness. Not a dream. Someone was at his door. He padded silently through the darkened house, his bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floors. The insistent knocking continued, now accompanied by a muffled voice. "Police! Open up!" Marcus reached the door, his hand hovering over the deadbolt. He glanced at the security monitor. Two figures stood on his porch, bathed in the harsh glare of the streetlight. Uniformed. He hadn't had dealings with the police in years. "Just a minute," he called out, his voice low and even. Brutus, roused from his slumber on the living room rug, lumbered to his feet. A low growl rumbled in his chest, escalating to a series of sharp, authoritative barks as he approached the door. "Down, boy," Marcus commanded, his voice firm but calm. Brutus hesitated, his eyes fixed on the door, his hackles raised. The barking subsided to a low, guttural warning. Marcus unlocked the door and opened a crack. "Officers? What can I do for you?" The taller of the two officers, a young man with a nervous demeanor, stepped forward. "We receive a noise complaint, sir." Loud music reported coming from this residence. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, avoiding Marcus's gaze. "I was asleep," Marcus replied, his voice still even. "No music playing here." Brutus, sensing Marcus's unease, pushed his head through the narrow opening, sniffing at the officers. His growl intensified. "Keep your dog back, sir," the nervous officer said, his voice rising in pitch. He took a step back, his hand instinctively moving towards his holster. This was Finnegan. Marcus could smell the fear rolling off of him. "He's just being protective," Marcus said, trying to diffuse the situation. "He won't bite." Brutus, interpreting Finnegan's fear as a threat, let out a ferocious bark and lunged forward, pushing the door further open. He didn't bite, but his sheer size and ferocity were intimidating. Finnegan yelped, stumbling backward. In a split-second decision born of panic and inadequate training, he drew his weapon. "No!" Marcus shouted, his voice laced with a desperate urgency. The sound of the gunshot ripped through the quiet night. Brutus crumpled to the ground, a pathetic whine escaping his throat. Blood bloomed on his dark fur. Time seemed to slow. Marcus stared in disbelief at Brutus, then at Finnegan, whose face was a mask of shock and horror. The other officer, older and more seasoned, stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. What did you do?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. The calm facade he had cultivated for so long began to crack. Finnegan stammered. He lunged at me. I thought he was going to attack." Marcus knelt beside Brutus, his hands trembling as he felt for a pulse. Nothing. His eyes, usually so calm and controlled, burned with a cold fury. He looked up at Finnegan, his gaze unwavering. "You murdered him," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The words hung in the still night air, heavy with unspoken threat. The dormant warrior within him was stirring. The ghost's grief. Brutus's whimpers were wet and ragged against Marcus's cheek. The labored breaths hitched, then stuttered, each one a tiny, agonizing death knell. He cradled the dying dog, his large hands clumsy with tenderness, stained crimson. "Easy, boy. Easy now." The words were a broken promise, a useless comfort against the undeniable truth. Brutus's body trembled, a final, valiant stand against the encroaching darkness. Then stillness. A low growl, guttural and inhuman, clawed its way up Marcus's throat. He laid Brutus gently on the rain-slicked asphalt, the fluorescent glare of the approaching sirens painting the scene in stark, unforgiving light. The world tilted, warped by a sudden, dizzying rush. Dust, the acrid tang of it coating his tongue, clinging to his sweat-soaked skin. Kandahar, 2010. The sun, a brutal hammer beating down on his skull. A child's scream, high-pitched and desperate, cut through the chaos. He moved without conscious thought, a wraith in the swirling sand, his M for an extension of his very being. For 10 ghosts down before they even knew he was there. The ghost. That's what they called him then. A whisper in the wind, a bringer of swift, silent death. A legend forged in blood and sand. The sirens were closer now, their piercing wail slicing through the night. Marcus knelt beside Brutus, his fingers tracing the familiar curve of the dog's head, the soft fur still warm. He remembered bringing Brutus home, a scrawny, nervous pup rescued from a kill shelter. He'd promised to protect him. Saigon, 1998. A monsoon raged, turning the streets into treacherous rivers. He was younger then, leaner, but the same cold fire burned in his eyes. A network of arms dealers, peddling weapons to insurgent groups. He'd dismantled them, piece by piece, a phantom moving through the shadows, leaving behind only bodies and whispers of fear. He stood, slowly, deliberately, his movements betraying none of the turmoil raging within. The officers piled out of their cruisers, faces flushed with adrenaline, weapons drawn. They hadn't recognized him. They hadn't seen the glint of steel in his eyes, the barely contained fury simmering beneath his calm facade. "Good, sir, step away from the animal." The officer's voice was sharp, laced with nervous authority. Marcus didn't acknowledge him. He stared down at Brutus, a wave of grief washing over him, so profound it threatened to buckle his knees. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. A cold, hard resolve. Mogadishu, 2003. A hostage situation gone sideways. He'd rappelled from the roof, a silent predator descending into the lion's den. 12 armed men, holding a group of aid workers. He'd taken them all out in under 3 minutes, leaving only stunned silence and the faint scent of cordite in the air. The officer repeated his command, louder this time, his hand hovering over his holster. Marcus finally turned, his gaze locking onto the officer's eyes. The officer flinched, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He saw something there, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "You took something from me," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous, a rumble of distant thunder. "You made a mistake." The rain intensified, washing the blood down the drain, but it couldn't wash away the feeling. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in his chest, but it had been transmuted into something else. Something sharper, colder, more deadly. Justice. It was a promise whispered on the wind, a vow etched in blood. The ghost was awake, brushed aside. The precinct stank of day-old coffee and pin-up aggravation. Before the scuffed counter, Marcus felt the chill of the linoleum seep through his boot soles. Above, the fluorescent tubes buzzed, a grating counterpoint to the seething resentment in his gut. He had to report the incident, demand accountability. Justice, a long-dormant ideal, now gnawed at him with renewed force. "Name." The man behind the desk, eyes fixed on his monitor, didn't bother to look up. "Marcus Jones." "Purpose of visit?" "I need to lodge a formal complaint." The officer, nameplate reading Finnegan, finally glanced up, his gaze, magnified by thick lenses, jittering across Marcus's face. "Complaint? Concerning what exactly?" "About the officers who visited my property this morning. They killed my dog." The statement felt hollow, a paltry summation of the morning's brutality. Finnegan's fingers froze mid-stroke. He visibly gulped, his Adam's apple performing a frantic dance. "Shot your, maybe animal control is that who you need?" Marcus's jaw hardened. "It wasn't animal control. It was your people. They were after someone else and ended up killing my dog." He kept his voice even, barely suppressing the urge to pulverize the desk. Finnegan shuffled papers, avoiding his gaze. Right. So a complaint. Need you to fill this out." He slid a thick stack of forms across the slick surface, reams of bureaucratic mire. Marcus skimmed the pages. It was a labyrinthine questionnaire, demanding information he had no intention of disclosing. "This is absurd. I just want to tell someone what happened. Hey, I just work here, okay? Everyone's got a grievance these days. If you want it taken seriously, fill out the paperwork." A sharper edge crept into Finnegan's tone. "Taken seriously?" Marcus echoed, incredulous. My dog is lying dead. How much more serious can it get? A woman's voice, crisp and authoritative, sliced through the stale air from a nearby office. Finnegan, everything all right out there? Finnegan practically jumped. All good, Captain Reed. Just assisting a citizen. The woman emerged. Captain Reed. She carried herself with an air of command, her eyes missing nothing. Her uniform was immaculate, her dark hair sculpted into a severe bun. Is there a problem here, officer? Captain Reed's gaze swept him up and down, registering his work-worn face, his rough hands, the barely leashed fury radiating from him. No problem, ma'am. This gentleman wishes to file a complaint. Just getting him the necessary documentation. Finnegan's voice wavered slightly. Captain Reed turned her attention back to Marcus. And what is the nature of your complaint, Mr. Jones? This morning, officers came to my home, looking for someone. Don't know who. They entered without a warrant and shot my dog. He posed no threat. Captain Reed's expression remained impassive, but Marcus caught the barest flicker in her eyes, perhaps empathy or simply professional interest. Understand. Officer Finnegan, ensure Mr. Jones receives the appropriate assistance. She glanced toward her office. And Finnegan, let's try to expedite matters, shall we? We don't want to keep people waiting any longer than necessary. Giving Marcus one final, assessing look, she retreated into her office, the door latch clicking firmly. Finnegan expelled a heavy sigh. Look, just fill out the forms, okay? We'll process it when we process it. He nudged the papers forward, his eyes conveying a silent plea. Seriously, it's procedure. My hands are tied. Marcus stared at the forms, then at Finnegan's anxious face. He knew this was a dead end. Not justice, but a bureaucratic smokescreen. With a low growl of frustration, he turned and walked out, the unanswered questions a leaden weight in his chest. The fluorescent hum seemed to amplify, a jeering soundtrack to his defeat as he shoved through the heavy doors and back into the unforgiving glare of the sun. He was alone, still, and his dog remained dead. Reversion. The refrigerator's monotone drone filled the quiet apartment. Inside, a dozen eggs seemed to mock his paralysis. Appetite was absent. The knot in his stomach was pure, unadulterated anxiety, the prelude to action he knew so well. He slammed the door shut, the sharp click punctuating the silence. 72 hours. For 72 hours, he played the role of Marcus Jones, the grieving neighbor, the model citizen. 72 hours he'd choked down the bitter taste of powerlessness, watching the news reports spin justifications for Zeus's death. Far too long. He headed to the rear of his closet, past the carefully curated facade of dress shirts and tailored pants, past the life he desperately wanted. His fingers found a canvas duffel, tucked into the darkest corner, the fabric softened by time and use. He wrestled it out, the zipper shrieking in protest. Inside, shrouded in layers of midnight-colored cloth, lay the implements of a forgotten profession. He hadn't touched them in ages. The familiar heft of the customized Glock 19 was unsettlingly reassuring, the frigid steel a sharp contrast against his trembling hand. Swiftly, he disassembled and reassembled it, his muscles remembering moves he'd thought buried. The magazines were full, each bullet a silent pledge of lethal precision. His palm traced the texture of the Kevlar vest, the interwoven fibers a physical echo of past perils. Tonight, armor wasn't necessary. This was reconnaissance. He needed the complete picture on Officer Miller, the full, unvarnished truth behind the shooting, the anatomy of the cover-up he instinctively sensed. He needed leverage to expose the lies. He sat before his computer, abandoning job boards and local headlines for the city's digital underbelly. Security protocols shattered beneath his fingertips. Databases yielded their secrets like confessions. He hunted for everything on Miller. Residences, contact information, digital footprints, bank statements. Fragments of truth with which to assemble a portrait. Divorced, burdened by debt, a stickler for procedure. Was Miller a puppet or a willing participant in a larger conspiracy? He didn't yet know, but he would. He switched windows, accessing encrypted channels, reaching out to ghosts from his past. Coded messages, terse and to the point, the language of a world he'd sworn off. He needed eyes and ears on the streets, individuals capable of moving unseen, of asking dangerous questions without raising suspicion. The replies arrived swiftly, efficiently, devoid of any warmth. They hadn't forgotten. They respected him. They were in his debt. As the first tentative streaks of dawn filtered through the blinds, Marcus shut down his laptop. The atmosphere in the apartment had shifted, crackling with purpose. Marcus Jones was gone. What remained was something older, sharper, immeasurably more dangerous. The ghost had returned, and the hunt was about to begin. Unseen investigation. The precinct throbbed with a palpable tension, a thick miasma of anxiety. Marcus, a wraith among shadows, melted into the unlit corners. He wasn't seeking accolades or pronouncements, just unvarnished truth. His initial foray, internal affairs. Years of meticulous training had gifted him the ability to circumvent security protocols that would baffle even veteran cyber experts. He navigated the digital maze with the silent grace of a stalking panther, erasing his tracks as he went. The files were a chaotic jumble, yet the information lay within, obscured by layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. He zeroed in on Finnegan and his partner, Davies. A pattern swiftly crystallized. A litany of accusations, undue force, venomous language, even a couple of suspiciously dismissed assault charges. Nothing that stuck, nothing warranting serious punishment. Just hushed complaints, shadowed gossip, and a nagging sense that these two operated beyond established boundaries. Marcus felt a familiar chill grip his insides, an echo of past battles hard won. One document, in particular, snagged his attention. A barroom brawl from 2 years prior. Finnegan, off-duty, embroiled in a fracas that left a man with a fractured cranium. Case dismissed, witnesses backtracking. The file stank of a whitewash. Marcus copied it, archiving it securely. This transcended mere indiscretion. It was a deliberate perversion of justice. He redirected his focus toward Davies. The template was different, more nuanced. Davies was the facilitator, the blind eye, the source of alibis, the keeper of polished paperwork. He was the lubricant that kept the engine of deceit purring. Marcus proceeded to financial records, breaching databases with the seasoned nonchalance of a lifelong digital denizen. He wasn't hunting for outright graft, not yet. He sought anomalies, discrepancies, anything that felt off-key. He unearthed several. Modest sums for the most part, but consistent deposits into offshore havens, unrecorded cash withdrawals, sufficient to trigger serious inquiries. He located Finnegan's residence, spending the ensuing hours in his cruiser, posted a block away. The house was diminutive, unremarkable, a cookie-cutter residence in suburbia. He observed Finnegan arrive, his posture slouched under the weight of weariness. He appeared a man burdened by an invisible load. Marcus cared little for Finnegan's pain. He sought the core of the matter. As night deepened, Marcus saw him leave again. He shadowed him, maintaining a discreet distance. Finnegan drove to a dilapidated section of town, pulling up to a dingy-looking tavern. He paused, then vanished inside. Marcus waited. He couldn't discern Finnegan's errand, but instinct screamed it was unsavory. An hour later, Finnegan reemerged, looking even more disturbed. He re-entered his vehicle and accelerated away, his driving reckless. Marcus trailed him back to his house, then dissolved into the darkness, leaving Finnegan to grapple with his inner demons. Back in his own austere lodgings, Marcus scrutinized the evidence. The composition sharpened, yet remained incomplete. He required more. He needed to decipher Finnegan's motives, his vulnerabilities. He needed to grasp his inner workings. The dog was dead. The cover-up churned forward. But the ghost was just warming up. Paranoia sets in. Finnegan's hands slicked with sweat against the steering wheel. The patrol car felt like a tin can, every rattle amplified, every shadow a potential threat. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see what? He wasn't sure. But the feeling of being watched, a cold prickle on the back of his neck, hadn't left him since the incident with the dog. He missed the turn onto Elm Street, overshot it by a block. "Damn it," he muttered, slamming on the brakes. A horn blared from behind him. He flipped the guy off, his knuckles white. "Easy, Finnegan," Reed's voice crackled over the radio. "What's your 20? Lost my head for a sec, Captain," he mumbled, making a wide U-turn. "Just a little jumpy is all. Everything all right?" Reed asked, her tone laced with concern. "Peachy," he lied. The streets seemed different now, the familiar houses and storefronts somehow menacing. A group of kids playing basketball stopped and stared as he drove past, their faces unreadable. He imagined them whispering, pointing, calling him a dog killer. Back at the precinct, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nobody was talking, but the air buzzed with unspoken accusations. He saw Miller eyeing him from across the room, a look of barely concealed disgust on his face. "What's your problem?" Finnegan snapped, his voice louder than he intended. Miller didn't answer, just shook his head and walked away. "Something you want to share, Finnegan?" Reed asked, appearing suddenly beside him. "Just tired of the stink eye, Captain," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Like I wanted any of this to happen." Reed sighed, rubbing her temples. "Nobody thinks you did, Finnegan. But we all have to deal with the consequences. And right now, those consequences are tearing this department apart." "So what do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice rising. "Apologize to the whole damn city? Wear a hair shirt." "I want you to do your job," she said, her voice firm but controlled. "And I want you to trust the people you work with. We're a team, Finnegan. Or at least, we're supposed to be." He scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one everyone hates." Reed's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare play the victim here. You made a mistake, Finnegan. Own it." He opened his mouth to argue, but the look on her face stopped him. He knew she was right, but owning it felt impossible. The weight of it, the shame, was crushing him. Later, in the locker room, he overheard Miller talking to Davis. "He's cracking," Miller was saying. "It's only a matter of time before he folds." "You think he'll rat us out?" Davis asked, his voice hushed. Finnegan froze, his blood running cold. "Rat them out? What do they think he knew?" He slammed his locker shut, the noise echoing in the suddenly silent room. "What are you two whispering about?" he demanded. Miller and Davis exchanged nervous glances. "Nothing, Finnegan," Miller said too quickly. "Just shop talk." "Bullshit," Finnegan said, his hands shaking. "You think I'm going to roll over on you? You think I'm stupid?" "Nobody thinks that," Davis said, backing away slightly. "Then what were you talking about?" Finnegan pressed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Miller stepped forward, his eyes hard. "Maybe we were talking about how you panicked and shot a damn dog for no reason. Maybe we were talking about how you're making all of us look bad." Finnegan lunged at him, but Davis grabbed his arm. Hey, calm down. Get off me," Finnegan shouted, struggling against Davis's grip. "I'm not going down alone." Reed appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "What in God's name is going on here?" The three men froze, caught in the act. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by Finnegan's ragged breathing. Reed looked from one to the other, her eyes narrowed. "I want all of you in my office. Now." Internal affairs. The squad room felt different that morning. Colder somehow. The usual banter was absent, replaced by a nervous energy that crackled in the air like static. Captain Reed had called an all-hands meeting, and the weight of her silence before she spoke was almost unbearable. "Something isn't right," she finally said, her voice low but firm, cutting through the tension. "The Hernandez incident. The reports are inconsistent. The timelines don't match up. I need to know what really happened out there." Reed announced an internal investigation, effective immediately. Every officer involved would be interviewed, their statements cross-referenced. She stared intently at each face in the room, her gaze lingering a moment too long on Finnegan. He visibly paled, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "I expect complete honesty," Reed continued. "Anything less will be considered obstruction and dealt with accordingly." The air grew even thicker as the meeting adjourned. Finnegan practically bolted for the coffee machine, his hands shaking as he poured himself a cup. He caught Marcus's eye across the room. Marcus offered no sign of acknowledgement, his expression unreadable. Reed's interviews began promptly. One by one, officers were called into her office, emerging later looking shaken or subdued. Finnegan was one of the last to be summoned. He stalled, shuffling papers on his desk, trying to delay the inevitable. He found Reed seated behind her desk, the afternoon sun glinting off her short, cropped hair. The room was meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside him. She gestured for him to sit. "Officer Finnegan," she began, her tone neutral. "Let's go over your statement regarding the events of Tuesday night." Finnegan swallowed hard. The lie he'd agreed to felt like a lead weight in his stomach. He recited his version of the events, his voice wavering slightly. He avoided Reed's gaze, focusing on a spot just above her head. Reed listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with pointed questions. "You stated that Mr. Hernandez became aggressive and charged at you. Can you describe his demeanor?" "He was agitated," Finnegan stammered, yelling, waving his arms around. "I felt threatened. Threatened enough to use lethal force." Reed pressed, her eyes narrowing. Finnegan flinched. "I followed protocol, Captain. I feared for my safety." Reed leaned back in her chair, studying him intently. "Protocol also dictates clear and concise reporting, Officer Finnegan. Your report is lacking in detail." Finnegan's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the sweat beading on his forehead. "I was under pressure, Captain. It was a chaotic situation." Reed didn't respond, her silence more damning than any accusation. "That will be all, Officer Finnegan," she finally said, her voice flat. He practically stumbled out of her office, gasping for air. The squad room felt like a pressure cooker. Every eye seemed to be on him. He needed to talk to someone, to confess, to unburden himself. But who could he trust? Unseen, unheard, Marcus watched from the periphery. He'd positioned himself strategically, a shadow lurking just beyond the edge of the activity. He'd heard the hushed conversations, witnessed Finnegan's descent into panic. He knew Finnegan was cracking. The ghost knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the truth was a loaded gun, and it was about to go off. He continued to observe, his senses heightened, waiting for the moment to act. He still didn't know what his actions would be, but they would be decisive. Confrontation and confession. The metallic tang of dread bit at the back of Marcus's throat, a far cry from the familiar scent of gun solvent. Across the cramped break room, beneath the drone of failing fluorescent tubes, Finnegan appeared drained, his face a bloodless mask replacing its usual ruddy glow. Marcus slid a weighty manila envelope onto the scarred tabletop. The thud broke the strained silence. "It's all there, Finnegan. The fabrications, the deceptions, the planted items." Finnegan didn't reach. He knotted his hands, knuckles gleaming bone white. "Marcus, I swear, I haven't a clue what you're implying." The words emerged as a breathy tremor. Marcus's gaze remained an unyielding pressure. "Spare me the charade. I possess sworn testimonies, lab reports, even a verbatim record of your call to dispatch. Concrete proof. Undeniable." He devoted 2 days to assembling the pieces, a bleak tableau of negligence and outright spite. Each new revelation stoked the glacial rage within him. Requital for shadow. Requital for their attempted smear. At long last, Finnegan's shaking fingers reached for the package, nearly fumbling it. He breached the seal with painstaking slowness, extracting the documents one at a time. His complexion lost more color with each perused page. The pretense he'd maintained, the paper-thin facade of innocence, disintegrated like ash. A stifled groan escaped him. He sagged in his seat, broken. I panicked," he whispered, his voice a mere rasp. "It all happened so quickly. The dog had lunged." "The dog was secured, Finnegan." Marcus countered, his tone clipped. "You executed him in cold blood. Then you tried to pin it on me." Tears gathered in Finnegan's eyes, blurring the damning evidence in his hands. "They told me to. Captain Reed wanted it buried." A muscle ticked in Marcus's jaw. He'd held on to the hope Reed was uninvolved. "Don't insult me," Finnegan. I know Reed. She's not capable of issuing such an order. Finnegan shook his head, tears streaking his face. No, not a direct command. She just implied the need for discretion. Said the public wouldn't understand. It had tarnished the department's image. He inhaled sharply, striving for composure. Sergeant Miller. He made his desires explicit. Stated Reed trusted me to manage it. Marcus offered no response, allowing Finnegan's culpability to envelop him. The truth acted as a solvent, dissolving his meticulously crafted persona. I'm offering you a choice, Finnegan, Marcus stated, his voice a hushed threat. You can deliver this package to internal affairs yourself, confess everything, and face the music. Or I can. And I guarantee, Finnegan, you do not want me involved. Finnegan met his gaze, his eyes wide, orbs of terror. He understood Marcus's capabilities. He'd heard the stories, the murmurs about the ghost. And he knew, with bone-deep certainty, that Marcus wouldn't hesitate. He nodded slowly, defeated. I'll do it, he breathed. I'll recount everything. Later that day, Marcus loitered outside Captain Reed's office, listening to the muffled sounds of the confession. Finnegan's voice, thick with remorse, cut by Reed's incisive interrogation. He detected Reed's rising inflection, her tone hardening with each painful admission. You deceived me, Finnegan. You suppressed evidence. You attempted to frame an innocent man. A pause followed, then Finnegan's desperate entreaty. I'm sorry, Captain. I only sought to safeguard the department. Reed's reply was devoid of warmth, a chilling pronouncement. You didn't safeguard the department, Finnegan. You defiled it, and you desecrated the faith of the citizenry we pledged to protect. Marcus turned and walked away. The weight on his soul remained, but a glimmer of optimism had begun to shine. Justice was on its way, delayed perhaps, but inevitable. He still had miles to travel, but the initial peace had fallen. A new companion. The courtroom emptied slowly, the air thick with the stale scent of justice served, or at least a semblance of it. Marcus lingered, watching Captain Reed address the press outside. Her words, amplified through the courthouse speakers, resonated with a steely resolve he hadn't heard before. This department, she declared, her voice clear and firm, will not tolerate corruption. Detective Harding and Officer Davies acted outside the bounds of the law, and they will be held accountable. We owe it to the memory of Mr. Williams' dog and to the community to ensure this never happens again. Marcus allowed a ghost of a smile to touch his lips. It wasn't a victory, not really. Brutus was gone, but maybe, just maybe it was a start. He found Reed back in her office, the door slightly ajar. She looked exhausted, but a flicker of determination still burned in her eyes. Jones, she said, nodding wearily, I appreciate you coming forward. It wasn't easy. It was necessary, he replied, his voice flat. The fallout will be significant, she admitted, running a hand through her short, cropped hair. But I meant what I said out there. I'm going to clean this place up, even if it's the last thing I do. Marcus simply nodded again, offering no platitudes. He knew the cost of such promises. He'd lived it. He left the station and drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. The silence in the car was deafening, a constant reminder of the absence beside him. Finally, he turned towards the outskirts of town, towards the county animal shelter. The air inside the shelter was a cacophony of barks and whines, a symphony of loneliness. Marcus walked slowly down the rows of cages, his heart heavy. He wasn't looking for a replacement. He knew that was impossible. He was looking for something, connection, perhaps, a reason to keep going. A small, scruffy terrier mix with mismatched ears caught his eye. The dog was huddled in the back of its cage, trembling slightly. It didn't bark or jump, just watched him with large, soulful brown eyes. He knelt down, extending a hand slowly. The dog hesitated, then crept forward, sniffing cautiously. Marcus felt a wet nose nudge his palm, and a surge of something akin to hope flickered within him. He spent the next hour filling out paperwork, answering questions, and trying to ignore the ache in his chest. They told him the dog's name was Lucky, a name that seemed almost cruel given its timid demeanor. As he led Lucky out of the shelter, the dog stayed close to his leg, its tail tucked between its legs. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Marcus felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. Back at the house, Lucky explored cautiously, sniffing every corner, every piece of furniture. Marcus watched him, a silent observer. He filled a bowl with water and another with food, and Lucky ate with a nervous eagerness. Later, as darkness fell, Marcus sat on the porch, Lucky nestled beside him. The cool night air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. He stroked the dog's fur, feeling its small body tremble slightly. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice rough. "You're safe now." He wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or to himself. As he sat there, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light, a new thought took root in his mind. He wouldn't forget Brutus. He couldn't, but he could honor his memory by giving this little dog a second chance, a better life. He could find a new purpose in protecting him, in offering him the love and loyalty he had once shared with his faithful companion. The road ahead would still be long and hard, but he wouldn't be walking alone.